right? I've seen buses blown up after, of course, they were blown up. I've seen surrender of terrorists. I've heard of, and I've sort of come across people whose kith and kin were killed by terrorists. It's sort of placed somewhere between a journal article and a newspaper article. A journal article is inaccessible by its very nature. It's very highfalutin theory and sort of conceptual gymnastics, and people don't really read that. People don't have access to that. You know, I've always believed that it is important for you to reach out to people. When I was in the university and when I wrote books, what sort of drove me was the reader at the other end. Somebody is going to read it. Is that person going to understand what I'm writing? Am I writing for that person? Or
Welcome to a new episode of Books and Banter, where we celebrate the glorious journey of prominent authors. And today we have with us an Indian scholar of international relations and security studies who was recently associated with Jawaharlal Nehru University and currently with Shiv Nada University. We have with us today Professor Happymon Jacob. He is the author of influential works on India-Pakistan relations, including Line on Fire, Ceasefire Violations and India-Pakistan Escalation Dynamics. And his latest book, which we're expecting in a couple of months, is India After Non-Alignment, The Quest to Become a Pole in International Politics. Interestingly, he is also the founder of India's World, a platform that fosters informed debate on India's foreign policy and global engagement. Welcome to the show, Happy.
Thank you, Portia.
Before I ask you a question, let me tell my audience that he has written a series of books, of which the most prominent was Line on Fire, Ceasefire Violations and India-Pakistan Escalation Dynamics. And his latest book, which we're expecting next month, is India After Non-Alignment, The Quest to Become a Pole in International Politics. He is also the founder of India's World, a prominent magazine in association with the External Affairs Ministry in India. And it's a platform that fosters informed debate on India's foreign policy and global engagement. Let's start with your personal journey, Happy. You have worked as a scholar, author, a policy interlocutor, a public intellectual. Could you briefly tell us what has been your intellectual journey and what exactly drew you to international relations and security studies?
Thank you, Portia. It's a delight to be here. Thank you for having me. You know, why did I study international relations? I wanted to study philosophy, and I did study philosophy. You know, I guess when I look back at my philosophy years, I guess I was a bit of too much of a restless soul. Philosophy is good for the soul. It's not good for the restless people. So I had to find something else, and I found, I thought international politics was very happening. You know, I remember telling my mother I wanted to study international relations. She said, sure, you can sit at home and study, because what's the point of going to a university to study international politics, right? But I joined international politics as a student a long time ago, a quarter century ago, back in the Mahatma Gandhi University in Kerala. Then I came to JNU to do my MPhil and PhD. Then I started teaching in JNU. I must say that, you know, from the very first day that I entered the classroom back in Kerala to study international politics, this was something that I knew that this was a line that I want to take in life. This is something that I'm going to use to understand the world, to interpret the world, and to sort of see why countries do certain things that they do. And international relations was not very fashionable at that point of time. I think it's become very fashionable today. I would say that there's never been a better time to study, practice,
absolutely,
right, international relations than is the case today. So I'm happy and I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing, and I enjoy it every day.
I can so relate to your journey. You know, back in school, I just knew it just as history and civics. And when I did my graduation in University of Calcutta, it was political science honors. I had no idea that, you know, one could specialize on international relations. And only when you delve into higher studies and masters and now PhD, you know, international relations is like such a niche thing within political science. So like you said, you know, understanding why decisions are made the way they are made, it is indeed very fascinating.
And the world is getting more and more specialized. So you need to have specialized subjects like international relations and diplomacy and foreign policy.
the age group that you would have dealt and you continue to deal with, is a time when people wonder what should we do next, and if their decisions are kind of driven from what's happening in the world, nothing like it. I mean, it's a very multidisciplinary subject.
On that point, Portia, absolutely right. When you don't study international relations just by reading books on foreign policy and diplomacy, you have to read history, you have to read sociology, you have to read philosophy, you have to read technology. You need to know a lot of things, because the world doesn't function on the basis of just one subject. Just because you study the subject, the world is not going to function like that. The world functions on the basis of a variety of things. I think that's what makes it even more interesting. My political science colleagues tell me, ours was the sexy subject, a happening subject at a certain point of time. Today, you guys have taken over seriously, because what we do, what we write, has an impact and implication for people to think about things, right? I mean, how sometimes even foreign policy makers think about things. So I think the impact of this subject is something that is only increasing and has increased over time.
So that brings me to the next question. Your work has often bridged, the world of academia, or you've had wonderful experiences of organizing and participating in track 2 diplomacy, and you've also worked as a policy maker in many ways. So how have you managed, balancing the approach in between all these fields?
That's an interesting question. A lot of people ask me, right, because I keep talking about track 1.5, track 2. I've never been part of the government, as you know, and I don't intend to be part of the government. But I would say that foreign policy making happens in an ecosystem, especially in a capital city like India, in Delhi. The foreign policy making happens in an ecosystem where you have the strategic elite, you have the writers, the authors, the thinkers, the policy makers, the government, the universities, the think tanks, etc. So I'm part of that ecosystem. I've been part of that ecosystem for almost 10 to 15 years, and I would say that my own sort of thinking about policy and academia has been that you need to make sense to the world. Whatever you write, whatever you do, whatever you speak has to have some impact on what's happening in the real world. There's no point in, if I wanted to do pure research, I'd have done philosophy. I could sit in the university, in my chamber in the university, and write about books which would only be read, say, by 20 people, 50 people at some point of time. I'm not satisfied with that. I think what I study has to have an impact on the world. I'm also a great believer that in the university, it's a public funded university. JNU is a public funded university, and the people at large are subsidizing you to study, to work, to write, and therefore you have a responsibility to the world, to make sense of the world for the people, to sort of interpret what's happening internationally and in the world for the public at large. I think that I also see that as a responsibility, not just to students, but to the public at large. So I think there's always been this undying desire in me to sort of bridge the so-called gap, which is bigger in India than any other country, I would say, the gap between scholarship and policy. They don't need to necessarily exist in two separate compartments. There are ways in which you can fuse the two together. You can bring the two together. I think I'm contributing in my little way to that effort in some ways.
Wonderful. Talking about how you go about writing your books as an author, your research methodology, your inspiration, you've written your books talk about rigorous scholarship, and at the same time, it's a narrative storytelling. How do you go about it?
It's an interesting question. Sometimes I wake up early in the morning at 2 o'clock and I wonder, there's this idea in my head, there's this argument doing rounds in my head. What do I do with that? So I go down to my laptop, I sort of open it, and I write a few things for an hour or something and go back to sleep, right? I mean, I
literally
chase,
penning down thoughts.
Exactly, and I go back to sleep. That's because I have an idea in my head. I have to sort of write it down, and then I go back to sleep. I chase ideas. I'm driven by ideas. I'm fascinated by ideas. I'm sort of tempted by ideas. So you give me a good idea, and I start thinking about it. So I chase after these sort of unique, interesting ideas. So, but then on a daily basis, you get different ideas. You can't write books on everything, right? So you so you think about these ideas that you you get from time to time, you write them down, then you think over it, and then over a course of, say, about 6 months, 8 months, then you sort of come down to focusing on one or two key ideas. The book that I have just written, which is going to come out of the Georgetown University Press and Penguin India in June, July this year, is on the India poll, right, on India after non-alignment. So I've been thinking about, there's a lot of talk today, say for example, about non-alignment and strategic autonomy, etc. So all these thoughts sort of did their rounds in my head, and I finally decided India has moved on from non-alignment. So I need to write something about that. So I think it's about experimenting with certain ideas. It's about sometimes throwing your ideas into the dustbin. Oh, this is not good enough, right? And you sort of talk to your friends and your colleagues about your ideas. Then finally, I think this is what I want to write about. And why do you want to write? Why do I want to write about it? Because there is a gap in the literature. Nobody has spoken about it. Nobody has said about it. Nobody has talked about it. So I want to write about that. So I think it's passion. It's about ideas that drive you. It is about the fact that you want to contribute to the discourse in the sort of intellectual domain in one way or the other. But I must say, this is also writing a book is not an easy job. You've done a PhD, yourself. Absolutely. It's not going to be easy. So you sort of sometimes you write a chapter of 10,000 words. You sort of rip that apart and put that in the last and say, I'm going to sort of wipe my slate clean and start all over again. These things happens. But that's a part of being an author. That's a life of a writer, I guess. But I enjoy what I do. Yeah.
You are so well known and you write extensively on India and Pakistan. Has there been like a defining moment in your life which drew you towards that specialization?
Interesting. I used to be a school teacher in J&K, and I was a school teacher during the insurgency years. Right, I've seen buses blown up after, of course, they were blown up. I've seen surrender of terrorists. I've heard of, and I've sort of come across people whose kith and kin were killed by terrorists, and I've sort of spent years, in Jammu and Kashmir as a teacher, as a student, and so there's always this first-hand experience of what happened in Jammu and Kashmir. Then I want to sort of look at the larger aspects of the Kashmir conflict, which is the India-Pakistan question, right? And then I started engaging in track to diplomacy, been to Pakistan. So I think it was for me at that point of time, say about 15 years ago, seeing the Kashmir question, seeing India-Pakistan relations as India's most challenging national security problem, or the most, let's say, consequential national security challenge as it. That's how I saw it, right? I mean, today, if I were to write something, I would probably not talk about Pakistan, because I don't think that is India's number one strategic challenge. I would say China is perhaps India's number one challenge, or something else. So at that point of time, Pakistan captured the attention, first because of my first-hand experience, and two, because I thought from Indian point of view, this is perhaps the most consequential strategic security threat, as it were.
I mean, you've written on Pakistan for so many years, and from whatever I've heard from Pakistani friends, they're very fond of your writing. So maybe the time you chose to pick up on it, I'm glad you did.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but be that.
I think for the academic world, great. The policy world has to figure it out.
Fair enough. That's for them to figure out.
Among all the books that you've written this far, what would you say was your most challenging? What has intellectually challenged you the most?
Well, I think the book that has challenged me the most, but it was also the most pleasurable experience writing, was the travelogue. The book that you mentioned at the beginning, the Line on Fire, was published by the Oxford University Press. But that's more of an academic book, right? Then I decided that there's only so many people who will read an academic book, so I wanted to write something that is more accessible to the general public. So I wrote a 63 to 70,000 word quick book documenting my travels on the two sides of the line of control, on the Pakistani side with the Pakistan Army and on the Indian side with the Indian Army. That was challenging because I had to be very careful about what I write, how I write, and sort of it had to go through legal vetting and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't offend anybody. So there were things I knew I couldn't have put in the book, and those sort of situations. So it's challenging in one sense, but it's also most pleasurable because I used what you said earlier, the genre called creative non-fiction writing, which is you sort of experiment with some of these. So you take a little bit of license in terms of how you describe something. It was not just a footnoted book. It was more of a let's say reflective, contemplative, meditative, conversation, anecdotal, that sort of thing comes into that kind of a genre. So I enjoyed a lot writing that book. It did better than the other books.
I mean, even as a scholar, I thoroughly enjoyed referring and reading that book for my thesis as well.
Hear that.
I'm happy you wrote it because it just makes very honestly, the theories that we study in a classroom, and when you read an account like this, it just makes it so much easy to understand how it's applied. That's how I saw it, and the decision making, how it is done on table and how it is actually done in reality. I think that's the kind of events and experiences, accounting of those things make it easier for any student to understand. Even if it's like our system is such where policymakers have to specialize every few years, and if they are just starting on Pakistan and if they get an account to read like this, it's immensely helpful.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
So I'm sure, given that you write on such sensitive topics, and I also came across a lot of reviews of your work. So there is a lot of critical review, there's a critical analysis, a critique, all of that is there. So one of them that I came across which said that your work overlooked the broader strategic intent. How do you respond to such a critique as an author?
I think first of all, if no one critiques your book, that's a useless book. So I'm happy that people have liked and disliked and critiqued the book, because that's engagement, that's serious engagement.
And that improves you as an author and scholar as well.
Absolutely. And if people seriously engage what I write, I'm only happier about that. On the question of whether I missed out on looking at the broader strategic picture when I looked at the India-Pakistan conflict on the line of control, I'd probably say no, because every book has a purpose. In a book, you cannot include everything. In a book, you should not include everything. A book has a purpose, a book has an objective, and the objective of that book was to clinically look at what happens on the line of control, explain why something happens and why something happens when it happens. That was the objective of the book. The objective of the book was not to look at the India-Pakistan conflict in its entirety. There are other books for that. So I looked at a gap in the literature, and the gap was that there is no clear explanation, scientific, data-driven explanation of why, when, how, and where ceasefire violations take place. So the objective of that book was to explain just that. So if somebody says, well, you haven't looked at the other things, he or she is right, but that was not the job of that particular book. But the criticism is always welcome. That's engagement.
Criticism is scope for improvement. Let's Indeed. Put it that way. So, from scholar to teacher to author, and now you have been a founder of India's World, which is an extremely well-read magazine across the country, and it's very helpful for people who are preparing for exams or trying to understand a subject, for instance. So what exactly was India's World objective, and what drove you to launch such a magazine? Me and Professor C. Rajamohan, who is the chair of the editorial board of India's World, we were chatting about I think 18 months ago, 19 months ago, in Delhi. That's a long time. You've come a long way.
I know. And we sort of told each other, listen, there is no dedicated, comprehensive Indian magazine on foreign policy. You go to Khan Market, you walk into any bookstore there, you'll find a copy of the Foreign Affairs, you'll find a copy of the Economist, you'll find a copy of the Time magazine, right? These are all foreign publications. You walk into a bookstore in Dubai, London, Singapore, you will not find an Indian magazine there. In fact, there is not even an Indian magazine that is dedicated to foreign policy. So we told ourselves that it is time that we bring out something. And, Rajamohan writes for the Indian Express, I write for Hindustan Times, and we said we've written stuff on foreign policy, we analyzed the foreign policy, let's start it. And then say sometime in August 2024, we decided to come out with it. The first issue, which was January 2025, was released in December 2024 at IIC. So since and in 2025, this was, I would say, this was a bi-monthly publication, once every 2 months. And now it is a monthly publication. Every month we come out with 55,000 words of well-edited. You can see the magazine. It has pictures. It has it has history. It has movies, music. It has art and culture. It has foreign policy, because India's world is not just foreign policy, right? India's world is not just a diplomatic relationship between India and other countries. It's about history, it's about diaspora, it's about culture. So we bring in all of that month after month. We do it. There's also an online version which keeps pace with what's happening in the world on a daily basis. So we come out with 3-4 new articles every week. Then there's an explainer section, because people want to know just in a nutshell what's happening. So we do all of those things. I would say this is India's World as a magazine is the labor of love. I can tell you, if I were to advise somebody, who'd come to me and ask me about what I thought about starting a magazine, I said, don't do it, because there's no money in it. You'll actually end up losing money. But I guess that's all right. We'll probably break even at some point of time. But so far, it's been a great ride. I love every day editing this magazine. The kind of thoughts that you come across, the kind of pictures you get, the kind of conversations that you have with others, new approaches, etc. But I think to go back to your question, I think the fundamental objective of a magazine like this is to sort of tell the India story, right? I mean, there is the India story, notwithstanding who is in government, which political party is in government, beyond the governments, beyond the ruling regimes, there is the India story that needs to be told about what India is, what its foreign policy is, what its outlook is, how it relates to the world, what its history is. That needs to be told without any partisan sort of approach, without any political party affiliation, somewhere right in the middle. This needs to be told. I think that's the objective behind this endeavor, as it were. But thank you for looking at the magazine.
Well, firstly, congratulations. I think it takes a lot to identify this gap, which you have just said. As a student of international relations, I don't think it ever struck me that India doesn't have a magazine of such a kind ourselves. And we've always been referring to foreign journals. And rightly so you've done, and well done on the journey and how you're going about it. I think it's very inspiring indeed.
Thank you.
So from there, I wanted to ask you that how do you see a growing appetite for such a serious magazine, with this new generation that's coming, where they understand the specialization, but I don't know how serious they are about going through the rigorous process that probably you and I have gone through. How do you see, and what would be your target audience in the years to come for a magazine like this?
I've always believed that it is important for you to reach out to people. When I was in the university and when I wrote books, what sort of drove me was the reader at the other end. Somebody is going to read it. Is that person going to understand what I'm writing? Am I writing for that person, or am I writing for my own happiness? I was writing for that person. So I think I always believed in the importance of writing in a way that people understand, writing in a way that is accessible to the general public. So this magazine, therefore, is not a newspaper. It doesn't publish articles like newspapers do, which is, and I'm not very happy with the way newspapers publish articles, even though I write for them, which is, it's not edited well. It's not, there is no to and fro. There's no back and forth in terms of the ideation process. So that we do that in the magazine. And secondly, it is also a, let's say, somewhere, it's sort of placed somewhere between a journal article and a newspaper article. A journal article is inaccessible by its very nature. It's very highfalutin theory and sort of conceptual gymnastics, and people don't really read that. People don't have access to that. So we wanted to start something that is somewhere in between these two sort of categories, newspaper article and a journal article. So this basically is supposed to break it down for you and tell you, if you understand simple English, you will understand what we are trying to say. So every time I get an article from an author, my first question to myself and to that person is that, do you think this is something that someone who understands simple English will understand? That's my test. If they understand that, fantastic. We are going to publish that. We're ready to publish it. So I think there's also therefore a responsibility to make podcasts like you're doing. There's a need to sort of reach out on social media. There's an importance in reaching out to people with the 200-word summaries of things, 100 words. Cater to people in the manner they understand things. Don't expect them to sort of come to you for knowledge and sort of you can give them in the manner that you wanted to give to them. No, you need to sort of make them understand. You need to sort of, you are in a service business in some ways. So the objective is to make sure that they understand what you write. That's a mission. So I'm even though print is dying, as you correctly pointed out, print is dying. It's difficult to make money out of publications, but I guess there is a way of getting around that with using the new, AI tools, multimedia, and other ways of going about things. But once you're clear in your mind that it is for the people out there, it's not for your own satisfaction, I think you will sort of come around to finding ways to, make that service accessible to people.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I'm sure a lot of people must be wondering that, do we, if we have to pay, then we might as well refer to books or go for free, I think. But people don't realize the concept, especially in scholarly articles, that when you pay up, the quality of the articles and the accessibility of that goes up that much more. I think that gap needs to be addressed, which is, I'm not sure if our universities and, kind of schools highlight these things. So I think that's where your answer makes a lot of sense.
I think when it comes to writing books or thinking about things, the book that I just, or is in the process of getting published, India After Non-Alignment, that's sort of a big picture argument about India's foreign policy. I've covered about 100 years of India's foreign policy from 1920 to 2020. It's
like a foreign policy handbook for India.
It's a long durée view of India's foreign policy. I think what's sort of at the top of my mind at this point of time is trying to understand India's grand strategy. There is the argument that India doesn't have a grand strategy, and I contest that. I think different countries have different ways of approaching grand strategy, explaining grand strategy. So I think my next pursuit in sort of this field is going to be trying to understand, explain India's grand strategy, past and present. So that's what is sort of dominating my mind space at this point of time.
Well, before I ask you your last question, I just want to put it on record that, you've had a massive role in inspiring me and motivating me in doing my PhD in international relations. And I'm very thankful to you for all the opportunities you've given me, whether it was track to diplomacy, whether it was publishing a monograph. I think I have learned a lot from you as an author. I've not had the opportunity to sit in your class, but someday, someday we'll do that too.
That you're a scholar in your own right.
That's okay.
Because of finishing a PhD.
Thank you. So, last question, which will be a very futuristic one that I wanted to check with you, is that if you had to write a book 10 years later, what would be a subject that you think that the scholars need to urgently focus on?
Well, I think if someone were to write a book 10 years from now, and if somebody were to come up to me and ask me, what should I write on? I'm a student of international politics. I'm a student of India's foreign policy, and I want to write a book on India. I will say, connect history with the present. We need more of that kind of historical work on India's foreign policy. Unfortunately, much of the foreign policy work today, many of the books that are being written today, about India, about India's foreign policy is too contemporary and therefore too thin. We need more scholarship which is based in history, which benefits from history, which is enriched by history. So this conversation that we have on foreign policy in a corner, and the conversations that the historians have in a different corner, that must end. The historians must talk to the foreign policy folks and vice versa. The foreign policy folks must talk to the economists, the geopolitics, the history, the geoeconomics. They should speak, and the technology folks. They should come together. There is no future to foreign policy analysis that is done in silos, that is done in echo chambers, that is done in the corners of rooms. They have to come together, assemble in the middle of the room and have this corner. That's the only way foreign policy analysis will get richer and benefit. That's the only way to do foreign policy going forward.
Thank you, Happy. Thank you for that wonderful answer. And again, glorious journey as an author and scholar. Thank you for sharing it with Books and Banter.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Portia.